Shocking events in Turkey tonight. A faction of the military says it carried out a coup and imposed martial law in the NATO member state. It blames terrorism and repressive rule and says that, quote, a peace council will reinstate democracy. Military movements and fighting are reported in both the capital, Ankara, and in Istanbul. Tanks have been firing near the parliament building in Ankara, and helicopters and fighter planes have attacked key points there and in Istanbul. Troops sealed off some government buildings and bridges and reportedly fired on protesters against the coup. But President Recep Tayyip Erdogan phoned CNN's Turkish branch to insist the coup will be put down. His whereabouts at this hour are not clear. In Washington, the White House says President Obama is being updated on the situation. Seaman Demokan is a reporter with Bloomberg News in Istanbul, and she joins us now by phone. Seaman Demokan, tell us the very latest on what you know.
Hi, there's a lot of uncertainty about who's in control of the nation right now. Now, as you said, President Erdogan spoke earlier via FaceTime on CNN Turk, and he says that he's still Turkey's president and the chief of the army. Erdogan has urged the public to take to the streets and public squares in resistance of this coup, and that's what we're seeing right now. There's demonstrators against the coup across Turkey. Now, Turkey's army, on the other hand, a faction of the army, says that they've taken control of the country, and it says that international agreements will be honored, and it wasn't clear whether the whole army was involved, but we're hearing that it's just a fraction of the army.
Well, Seaman, that is my question. How much of the military is this faction? Is this most of it? And if it's not, then why isn't the rest of the military attempting to take back control?
Unfortunately, I really cannot answer that question because there's so much uncertainty about exactly how much of the army is part of this coup and how much of the army is against this coup. I mean, the presidential office is saying that the main generals of the army are not involved, and it is just a small faction. But, you know, again, as you said, if it was a small faction, then why has this been going on for hours now and the government can't take control again? So it's very uncertain about exactly what's taking place.
Now, President Erdogan, as we said, has asked the people who support him.
All kinds of implications about a change in power. None of them are very clear at the moment. But just think about Turkey's geography. It literally sits at the center of some of the most important, pressing foreign policy concerns, including the conflicts in Syria, the conflicts in Iraq, the generalized instability in the region, whereas Turkey was once seen as a stabilizing force in the Middle East and does still play an important role in the Syrian conflict in Iraq with the Kurds. It is now clearly an unstable country.
Stephen Cook, how popular is President Erdogan in that country?
This is an extraordinarily important point, Judy. He is quite popular, and he has made a call for his supporters to go out in the streets and to resist this intervention on the part of the military. It's extraordinarily dangerous. But what we often miss, or what's often missed in the discussion of Turkey, is that there's been so much focus on Erdogan and his personality and his drive to consolidate power that at least half of the country supports Erdogan. And you have to imagine that at least some of those who aren't supporters of Erdogan do not want to see a return to military rule in Turkey.
But just quickly, we know that increasingly in recent months, he has cracked down on the news media, on social media. I mean, he's made some significant changes there, has he not?
He has made many significant changes. Turkey, which was once a promising country, one that everybody hoped would make a transition to democracy, has made a huge. The very fact that there are ministers appearing on television would suggest that whoever this faction is that has tried to take over is, as of yet, is actually far from being successful.
Stephen Cook, I'm just hearing from our producer that we are told that there is a report out of Turkey that 17 police officers are reported to be dead as a result of a military helicopter attack outside the capital, Ankara. Give us a little more background on why the military or a faction of the military would be taking this dramatic action against President Erdogan.
Well, at a baseline, President Erdogan and the ruling Justice and Development Party, which has been in power for the last 13 or so years, has a worldview that conflicts with the worldview that is inculcated in the minds of many military officers. There's also a problem of security in the country. There's been a string of terrorist attacks over the course of the last year, at least 11. There's a sense that under Erdogan over the course of the last couple of years, a strategy of polarization has undermined the social cohesion of the country. He has moved from someone who was allegedly moving Turkey in a more democratic way to someone who has consolidated his power as an authoritarian. Military officers may very well not like the fact that Erdogan has been consolidating power at their expense. These are just some of the reasons why military officers might be unhappy with his rule.
I think it may be difficult for some people to understand why, when you think of a military coup, you don't think of a pro-democracy, pro-human rights coup. But I know that's what we've been told that their message is. I just want to say I'm just now told that the White House is saying President Obama has spoken with Secretary of State John Kerry. They agreed that the United States should be in a position of supporting the elected government in Turkey, which would be the Erdogan government. Just finally, Stephen Cook, the consequence of who's in control of Turkey. This is, after all, a country at the center of this strategic, incredibly important strategic part of the world in the Middle East, where it sits right next to Syria.
This is a country that is an anchor of American and Western policy with regard to Syria, Iraq, and a number of other important issues. Now that it seems to be an unstable place, it is going to have an impact on American policy and our approach to Syria, Iraq, and a variety of other interests in the Middle East. I think that it's something that we have not experienced since the 1970s, when Turkey was, the last time it was quite unstable. This is something new for everybody. This is an extraordinarily polarized country, and whatever the United States has been doing to work with Turkey to resolve the conflict in Syria, to working against the Islamic State in Iraq, all of this throws open in question whether those things can continue.
Cannot emphasize enough how important the consequences of whatever happens in this coup attempt are. Stephen Cook with the Council on Foreign Relations, thank you for joining us at this late hour. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.